I have the pleasure to be able to introduce our next speaker, and that is our Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Prior to the Biden administration, Secretary Buttigieg actually served 2 terms as being the mayor in his hometown of South Bend, Indiana. He's a graduate of Harvard University and a Rhodes Scholar of Oxford, so no slouch intellectually. Buttigieg served for 7 years as an officer in our U.S. Naval Reserve, and he actually took leave from his role as a mayor to be able to have a deployment in Afghanistan in 2014. He is affectionately known as Mayor Pete to many who know him, and he has worked across the aisle to be able to transform South Bend's future and to improve that community's everyday lives. In December of 2020, he was nominated by President Biden to serve as Secretary of Transportation. And as the Transportation Secretary, he has focused the agency on 5 key goals: safety, jobs, equity, climate, and innovation. These issues are incredibly important, and it's one of the many reasons that we are gathered here today. So today the Secretary is going to be joining in a fireside chat with Mayor Sean Patterson Howard. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the 19th Treasury Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, and Mayor Sean Patterson Howard.
Secretary Pete. No, it's really great to have a secretary who is a former mayor because they get it right off the back. So we know the Department of Transportation oversees everything from airports and railways and ports, street surfacing, bridges, tunnels, and all of those things, up to EV charging stations, and most important, mayors, potholes. Potholes are the most important thing that we hear about oftentimes in our communities. So please tell me how your experience as a former mayor helps to inform the work that you're doing now as Secretary of Transportation.
Well, thank you. First of all, Mayor, thanks for your leadership, and thanks for hosting me today. I'm always glad to be in the company of fellow mayors and former mayors. When I was mayor, it was my view that the level of government that has the most immediacy and in many ways the most direct, visible consequence for Americans is local government. That's what I believed when I was in local government. Now that I'm in federal government, I know that that's true, because I see that the most important things we do at the federal level is to empower local leaders and local residents to live lives of their choosing. And a lot of that happens through, of course, transportation and infrastructure. Every one of the issues that mayors are wrestling with right now ties in some way to transportation. Take housing, which I know is one of the biggest things on so many mayors' minds. Obviously, transportation is a different department than housing, but we also know that so many Americans live in either a place they can't afford so that they can have access to work, or they live in a place that is impossibly far away from work so they can be somewhere they can afford. And if we can work together to make transportation more accessible, more reliable, and more affordable, we are actually also alleviating the housing pressure that so many are under. So on issue after issue, what I find as a former mayor is the propulsion and the tools to do something about these issues that people face. And it has been a thrill, thanks to the funding in President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, to be able to work with so many of you. I mean, I've seen a number of the mayors here on the way in, and I was going in my mind through some of the phone calls that we've had about the good news that your community has competed and won a discretionary grant. What you're doing is your community is with bridges, with the formula dollars that are coming in partnership with the states, and of course the many things that you are hoping to do in the future that we're hoping to work together on. I have been a mayor knocking on the door of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and for that reason am determined to be a good partner to all of the leaders in this room and all of the 500 communities that you represent.
Thank you so much. So one of the pillars of the Biden administration has been Justice 40 and making sure that money is getting to underserved communities. And so whether you're in the rural, whether you're in the suburbs or an urban area, the ability to get around your community and the metropolitan area, like you said, for work, for services, for family, is critical. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Thriving Communities program and how you're utilizing the Thriving Communities program to help disadvantaged communities?
Yes, thank you. This principle is very important to us. And we know that often the smaller communities and the lower income communities, who are almost by definition the communities that have the most to benefit from federal funding if they can access it, are also the communities that are going to face some of the biggest challenges accessing that federal funding. Because it often costs resources even to put in an application. And then if you win, to get through all the compliance and the different steps that are required to use federal dollars. And we want to make sure that our process is more user-friendly. So Thriving Communities is an initiative which is partnering with a number of cities and towns and local governments to make it a little bit easier by getting folks on the ground to provide technical assistance on how to navigate our programs. There's more than 40 programs in transportation alone that were created or expanded through the infrastructure law. Everything from programs to get electric vehicle charging infrastructure to the places where it is not yet automatically profitable for the private sector to put it in, but where we know it'll make a big difference for people who are hoping to get the benefit of the savings that come with using an EV, all the way through to programs to eliminate railroad crossings. Now, the best way to make sure that you would never have a safety problem at a grade crossing is to not have the grade crossing at all. And especially as we look at rural communities where people have to wait far too long for a blocked crossing, there is a convenient, right? I know a lot of folks have experienced this, right? By the way, if you're ever having trouble with responsiveness from freight railroad companies, be sure to give us a call. We want to be helpful on that. But one of the things we can do is just eliminate some of those railroad crossings. That's a program that we have. But navigating all of that can be daunting, especially for a community that doesn't have an army of federal relations personnel on staff, and you shouldn't have to. We want to provide that support for you on the ground. Thriving Communities is an example of how to do that. We just launched the first few dozens of communities to participate, and we'll be setting up future rounds. So definitely get in touch through our Government Affairs Department if you're interested in participating or curious about what that could mean for your city.
So I know many of our communities have spoken about vehicular deaths and pedestrian deaths. So Safe Streets for All, I know, is an initiative that is coming out of the Department of Transportation. Can you talk to us a little bit about Safe Streets for All and how our communities can become safer, not just at railroad crossings, but many of our communities have aging traffic light infrastructures.
Yes.
We don't have complete streets, and so we want to lift that up for a few moments.
Yes, and I want to applaud you for thinking about how to make the designs of your streets safer, because that's a big part of how we can combat this rising tide of roadway deaths in our country. We have 40,000 people a year losing their lives in crashes on our roadways. That's roughly equivalent to the amount of loss that we have because of gun violence. And I think the only reason we're not up in arms about it is that we're used to it. But we shouldn't be, because these deaths are preventable. At the U.S. Conference of Mayors earlier this year, we highlighted 3 communities, Edina, Jersey City, and Hoboken, which are among the sizable communities that have gone at least 1 year with 0 traffic deaths. So we know it can be done. But we also know that a one-size-fits-all strategy is not going to work. The latest round of data has just come out. The good news is we seem to have stopped the rise, but we haven't reversed it yet. And if we're going to do that, that includes things like designing streets to be safer. So with the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, we have funded hundreds of communities in planning work and a handful of communities going already into construction to design roads and streets in a way that makes it less likely that these crashes will happen in the first place. And we're following a very data-driven approach here. And by the way, one of the things that the data show is that there is a lot of disparity in these traffic deaths. Some of the fastest rises in pedestrian as well as vehicular deaths were for Black, Latino, rural, and tribal Americans. And, again, one size fits all isn't going to be the answer here. We need to follow the data and apply the strategies that we think are going to work. But importantly, we're not sitting in Washington saying, you ought to do this, you ought to do that. We're funding community plans because we think the answers aren't going to come from all of Washington, all come from Washington, but more of the funding should. And that's exactly what we're doing, partnering with communities on your visions, your plans, and helping them become a reality.
I mean, and this is what, being a former mayor makes a difference when you become a secretary, because there's a different mindset. And so we've talked about infrastructure that is cut across so many Black and brown communities, whether they're rural, urban, suburban, metropolitan. In my community, we have a 1.1-mile railroad cut with 11 bridges that traverse it. And for years, about 7 of them were closed at any one time. And I know the first time I spoke with you, I explained that we had senior citizens. It was easier for them to jump on a train, a metro train, and go to the Bronx or to Harlem sometimes than it was for them to walk 10 to 15 blocks to cross an open bridge and then have to do the same thing all over again. So as I wrap up, can you talk to me a little bit about, or us about, Reconnecting Communities and how important that program is?
This is so important for so many Americans. And the idea of reconnecting communities is that the point of transportation infrastructure is to connect. And yet, in far too many places, you have transportation infrastructure that serves to divide in the form sometimes of a freeway, sometimes of a railroad line. And it actually, as in the specific real life example that you have shared, and I still remember our first conversation about this, right? When you have a resident who finds it easier to go all the way into another borough, into Manhattan or the Bronx than it is to go less than a mile within their own community to get groceries, that's a problem. And we talk about these problems not in order to beat anybody up, but because we have a chance now to fix it and do something about it. And so the first round of Reconnecting Communities funding is now out. We announced projects everywhere from Buffalo, New York, where they're going to cap the Kensington Expressway that cuts one part of the community off from another, to Tampa, where there's an interchange that really wrecked the flow of a community but can be done in a whole different way. And we're just getting started on this. We've funded a number of planning grants, including for a number of mayors and leaders represented here. Detroit, we've got an infra grant partnering with the state of Michigan and the community there to take I-375, which cuts like a gash through the community. And when it was built, really wiped out the neighborhoods of Paradise Valley and Black Bottom. And that, we found, can actually be reimagined as a boulevard that will still serve cars well and also serve the neighborhood well. This is work that will make nobody worse off and will make many people better off. Why wouldn't we be doing it? And thanks to the funding in the infrastructure law, we're in a chance to do just that. So whether you are still getting your community vision together and want support for planning, or whether you're ready to go on construction and just need the funds to make it happen, I hope you will examine the Reconnecting Communities program as an option. Now, 2 things I should mention. One, it is very competitive. Even with the historic, amazing funding that we've been able to get, largely with help from the support of mayors and leaders in this room, there is always more demand than we can meet any given year. But it is also always a good idea to come in with an application. We can help you make that application stronger if the answer the first year isn't yes. The second thing, though, I want to really emphasize, and you're living this, is that when you have an area, a community that has been divided or torn by a decision, maybe a decision made 2 generations ago, it is no small thing to get community alignment and agreement on what to do next. And that's not something that the Department of Transportation can solve, but it's something that mayoral leadership can play an enormously important role in guiding. As you know all too well, you're never going to get 100% agreement on anything in your community. I've been to my share of public meetings on things we thought were slam dunks, and we all know how those can go. but the role that you play, the moral authority that you exercise, the listening that you can make sure happens, can help to inform visions that bring a community together around where they want to go, like what we saw in Buffalo. That was part of how we knew that that project was ready for that federal support. And, and when you can achieve that, not just through your official powers, but through the authority that only a mayor has to bring people to the table, that makes it much easier for us to be a good partner at the federal level. So we are enthusiastic about the potential here and stand ready to work with everyone in this organization on making more of these visions into a reality.
So, Secretary Pete, I want to thank you. You were an amazing mayor and even a better secretary because you understand our needs. Thank you for reconnecting communities and thriving communities and safe streets for all and the technical assistance that you've provided. We really appreciate you. Thank you for being a great partner, and know that AAMA stands ready to work and to support the work that is being done under the Biden administration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.